If you really care about your kid and you want to be here and you say you want to be here to see them grow old, you kind of need to make a little bit of a change here, and you need to take this conditioning stuff a bit more seriously. It needs to be a priority for you. And I decided, hey, I want to be here for my kids. I want to be here to watch them get married. I'm going to have to make a change. Without that, I knew that I was putting myself at risk, and I wanted to put them first. And one way that I could put them first was by putting my health and fitness first. And cool, I love being strong, but actually conditioning's one of the other pieces of the puzzle if you want to have longevity.
Hi everyone, I'm Chris Rodak. Welcome to the Rising Father podcast. I have Hayden Pritchard. He is a PhD in exercise science. He's a strength coach. Welcome, sir.
How you going, Matt?
Doing great, man. I appreciate you being on here. Just recently found you, and you're like very, very knowledgeable and science-based with what you're talking about and putting out there in the world. So that's great. It's good to have opinions, but it's also great to have science-based backgrounds and actually be able to back up what you're talking about. So, like, can you kind of give your qualifications a little bit? Tell people what you're like an expert at.
Yeah, so I, as you mentioned, exercise science is where I've done my PhD. So I got my doctorate back in 2017, so a little while ago now. And I was teaching at the time on a basically sport and exercise science course, or strength and conditioning type course was what I was focusing on in terms of my area, although we did other stuff in terms of like management and that sort of thing, but that wasn't that wasn't me. So strength and conditioning is kind of my background there. I studied a Bachelor of Science at university prior to doing my honours, and then jumped into the PhD because it was something that kind of interested me, really, to be honest. I just was always fascinated with how the body can kind of adapt to a stimulus you put on it, and I just wanted to learn more about that. And I guess that first started back when I was doing athletics at high school, because I was one of those guys who I would say wasn't naturally gifted as such. Like, I kind of had to put in quite a lot of work to improve, and I think that's where my fascination kind of came from, was how can I be making myself better so that I can compete at this thing, because as a competitive guy that kind of is something that drives me. And then just that general intrigue and that enjoyment of science led me sort of down that path. And then I've done a bunch of coaching since then, worked a few different roles, and still do some coaching at the moment, and a bit of writing and research review and that sort of thing. So that's what I'm up to, and I guess that's my area. My topic for the PhD was tapering to improve maximal strength. So when I started the PhD, I was competing internationally in powerlifting, and so essentially it was kind of a natural progression of what's a part of this sport that's not that well understood that we can use as a model for this thesis, which I guess is the cool thing about a PhD, is you can kind of study anything as long as you're looking at something novel and following the scientific method. The options are kind of endless as to the sort of topics you could approach. And I remember when I graduated with my undergraduate degree, there was someone that had studied like the coloring of flowers, and I was just like, this is so out there. And that kind of showed me that, hey, you can do a PhD in literally anything that can be studied.
That's hilarious. So who are you writing for?
I've just recently got a role with BioLane, so Lane Norton, with the Reps Research Review. So I'm just getting onboarded now with that. So I'll be starting to write a little bit for them. But I've written content for the likes of Stronger by Science and Weightlifting House on various topics related to strength training. So last year I had a few articles with Stronger by Science. One of them was looking at kind of how do you prioritize your training, when you're in because being a dad, that's one of the things, is how do you make sure you're doing the stuff you need to do. So there was an article about that, how you can prioritize when life gets busy and make sure you're kind of still getting stuff in. Minimum effective dose training, which I've done an article with Dr. Pack. I don't know if you've Androlakis Korakakis, but he's known as Dr.__Pack, and he's kind of the minimum effective training guy on Instagram, I guess, is his brand. So
let's talk. Can I ask you, minimum effective training? What is that?
So essentially, what that's talking about really is what is the amount of training that we can do, and specific in this case to strength training, to ensure that we're still progressing. So rather than looking at it from what is optimal for making the most progress, which I guess is the way that people will tend to look at it, right? Is how can I make sure that I'm making as much progress as I can? What do I need to do that? That's typically the scientific way of looking at things, right? Is this method more effective than that method, or whatever it may be. But the minimum effective dose is really looking at, okay, that's cool. Like, we know that you might need to do a bit more if you want to be doing what might be quote unquote optimal. But with the minimum effective dose, you're kind of looking at what is the least amount I can do, but still manage to make progress. Because obviously, you're always going to have seasons in your life where you just can't fit in the same amount of training as you might have previously, right? There's going to be times where you might be traveling, you might be on holiday, you might have, a young kid who's waking up a lot at night, and you don't have quite the same amount of time as you may have had. And so the idea there really is, okay, during those periods, or even if your life is just always busy and you want to still be able to get stronger, what do you have to do to make sure that you can continue to add strength in those situations? And that's basically the premise of that. It's not just what's the minimum dose you can do to maintain, it's the minimum effective dose. So how much can you do to actually continue to progress? So yeah.
So what is the minimum effective dose?
Oh, you mean what is it as in how much?
Yes.
So with the studies that Dr. Pack did, he was looking at essentially a group of powerlifters or people who are fairly well strength trained. So that's probably a good context to think of it as well, is that it's not just for average Joe off the street, because if you've never trained before, you can pretty much look at a weight and you'll make some progress, right? But once you've been training for a wee while, you have to actually put in some work. So essentially, he looked at a few different things, but the main, I guess, method he was investigating was one where you either built up to a single or built up to a single and then did a few drop back sets at about 80% of the single, I think it was. So even when the athletes were just building up to doing a single at like a 9 to 9.5 RPE, so sort of just under a max effort, a little bit more left in the tank, they were able to progress a little bit over the period of, I think it was a 6-week study. I'd have to double check that, but I think it was a 6-week study. But when you added a couple of back down sets, so 2 or 3 back down sets essentially, so you did your single at whatever it might have been, 9 RPE or near maximal effort, you took that to 80%, did 2 to 3 sets of 3, you're able to progress, relatively, what would the word be? A decent amount, essentially what he had deemed as a meaningful amount. And the meaningful amount was dictated by speaking to strength coaches and saying, what would you consider to be, relevant progress over a time frame? And that was kind of what was he looking at as minimum? It kind of had to meet that definition of being effective in the eyes of a coach. So yeah, he did a series of studies on that, and essentially that's all it is. Like if you're looking at, say, squat, bench press, deadlift, I think in that study they were squatting twice per week, benching 3 times, and deadlifting once, but they literally did 3 sets per exercise or 4 work sets per exercise and done. So, it was like a 20-30 minute session and you're finished in the gym and you were still able to progress your 1 RM maximal strength. So yeah, it's not a hell of a lot. If you think of that as a few sessions that have maybe 9 working sets or 6 working sets in them, it's not much work to do. And even if you don't have time for that and you just get the 1 heavy single in some instances that's enough to progress, and in almost all instances that's enough to maintain your strength. So when you really push for time, just get a heavy stimulus in and then get out.
Yeah, so my question is, what's the most important out of what is the most important factor in this to maintain if you have super crunch for time? Is it just intensity of the set you're doing?
I would say so. And I like to think of things through the lens of what's called the fitness fatigue model. So what that is basically you have a session, a training session, you put in the work at this point in time, and then you'll be aware of this from your own training, right? That after that session that you've done, you generally will have a bit of a decrease in performance. There's fatigue, the muscles might be sore, there could be some neuromuscular problems or waste products, whatever it is, but essentially there's this dip in performance that comes from training, and that's called the fatigue after effect. But then conversely, at the same time, there's a fitness after effect, right? And what that is essentially doing is your body adapting, so more muscle fibers, better neuromuscular activation, whatever it may be. But the fatigue ones come on quite fast and quite strong, and the fitness ones tend to take a little bit of time to build, right? Because your body's having to actually change and adapt to that stress. And so what would be the most important stimulus to get that fitness after effect, or to maintain that fitness after effect, would be something that's really specific to the thing you're trying to achieve, right? If you did a set of 10, 10 sets of 10 or something, you're going to be really fatigued, but you're probably not going to actually get super strong from doing that. Whereas if you did a heavy single, that's the most specific thing to being strong, right? It's just doing something that expresses that maximal strength. So that would be what I would say is it's generally going to be the most important thing is the intensity from a strength perspective. That's probably the key part to remember there is that's if your goal is a 1RM, right?
Yeah. So the goals between like bodybuilding and strength training, what would be the difference in this approach?
Yeah, I guess with the bodybuilding side or with, trying to build some muscle is you generally need a bit of a high volume approach in order to be able to build muscle mass, but you can still get by with a little bit less. I can't remember the exact amount, but I think it was only a couple of sets. But the important part there was actually pushing those sets, pretty close to failure and doing a little bit higher volume. I couldn't quote the rep ranges exactly, but I don't imagine a single is going to be the best approach for that. You're probably looking at 8+ reps, I would say. But you can take a weight that's maybe...
Now, when you say single, what do you mean? Do you mean one set?
One repetition.
One rep?
Yeah. So
I
with
didn't
the
know
strength,
you meant one rep.
Yeah. So with strength training, you're looking at with that top set just being a single repetition and you're done. So, that might be 95% plus of your 1RM. So, if you can bench, say 100, that top set might be something like a 95 kg single. You might back down to say 80 kgs or 75 kgs. And sorry, I've just realized that I'm speaking in...
That's okay.
In
we
kilograms.
Have smart listeners. They can
translate the number to pounds, mate, and it means exactly the same, right? Because it's percentages.
Yeah. Times 2 is close enough.
Yeah, basically. That's kind of the approach there is building to a heavy, in terms of minimal effective strength training would be building to a heavy single or one repetition. So if that's a bench, let's go with 100 kilos, 220 pounds. You do a single at just under 220 or even at that if you're feeling good that day. You drop back to 80% of that. So in that case, that would be 80 kilos or 160 odd pounds. You'd do a couple of sets of 3 there, which actually wouldn't be very hard. Like you think of a triple at your 80%, it's not particularly challenging. You could easily do, probably 5 to 8, maybe even 10 reps, depending on the person at that load. So the back downs are really about having a bit of a faster stimulus, higher force stimulus, and also just getting a little bit of extra training volume into the equation. Yeah.
If you're let's talk about the fatherhood a little bit here. So if you're busy father, don't have a ton of time to train, what are the exercises you should be focusing on if you need to lose some fat, gain some muscle, be more athletic, be useful as a father, other things they have to do? Like what kind of exercises should be like compound movements or like what do you think?
Yeah, I'd typically go with compound movements almost exclusively in that sort of situation, right? Because you want to have things that are actually moving your whole body and using a whole lot of muscles at the same time. If you did just a bicep curl, you're working one muscle, and it still takes just as long essentially as doing, a set of rows or something like that. Yeah. So my approach would generally be, I think of movement patterns when I'm thinking of what exercises would I do. And typically with the lower body, I'll think of a squat pattern. So that could literally be a squat, that could be a leg press, that could be a hack squat, that could be a lunge. Anything kind of along those lines would be a squat pattern. And that's the first one that I'm looking at in terms of exercise patterns. The second one I'm looking at is something like a hinge pattern, So a hinge pattern could be a deadlift, stiff leg deadlift, good morning, Romanian deadlift, hip thrust, anything like that, where essentially the primary movement occurs at the hip joint. So, it's sort of anything where you're kind of bending at the hip. And those would be the two dominant movement patterns I'd be looking at for lower body. Your hinge pattern is going to get more of sort of the backside of your body. And then the squat pattern is going to get more, quads and muscles of the hips as well. Then upper body, basically there's pushing and pulling. Are the two key movement patterns, but those get broken up further in the way that I look at training into a vertical pull and a vertical push and a horizontal pull and a horizontal push. So vertical pulling, you're thinking of pull-ups, you're thinking of lat pull-downs. Vertical push, you're thinking of things like a military press, dumbbell shoulder press, essentially anything where you're pushing something from your shoulder to overhead. And then the horizontal versions of those essentially would be things like barbell rows for the horizontal pull, dumbbell rows, seated rows. I mean, the options are essentially endless for most of these things. And then, horizontal press would be something like, a bench press, dumbbell press, incline press, all those sorts of things. And that, in my mind, is kind of, if you're doing something in those patterns, and, you know, kind of getting them spread relatively evenly, so a similar amount of work across each of those, you're going to cover most of your bases. The only thing I would probably add to that is if you're looking at some of that athleticism side, probably the pure strength training isn't going to be all that you need. I think there's going to be some benefit. Yeah, some benefit to some cardio for sure. And then maybe even if, you know, if you're wanting to run around and sprint with the kids, you might even need to do, you know, some sort of sprints or jumps or something like that where you're actually being explosive because, you know, although strength training can help with that, it's not going to be the be all and end all. And I kind of think to myself, that's probably the one area I think my kids are going to catch me first. Speed. It's with the speed and the power stuff, because I just don't emphasize that as much. Whereas I need to more. I think cardio, true. Man, and strength, I think I can make them have to, you know, put in a fair amount of work before they can beat their old man. So, but yeah, that would probably be my approach with the overall, you know, full body picture in training. I don't tend to do heaps of isolation stuff in my own training, just because I think from a time efficiency perspective and also I guess reward, you know, for that time invested, it just doesn't make sense to me. And there's other people that will make sense, right? But for me at the moment, that's just not really a massive priority of mine. Yeah.
So, I mean, CrossFit has a lot of those kind of movements. Is CrossFit you think CrossFit's a good thing for guys to do?
Yeah, I used to do CrossFit back in 16 through to 2018, I think it was. I had a period where I did some CrossFit, and I mean, I think you just have to look at the people that are doing that sport if you're thinking of it from an aesthetics perspective, and you can see some pretty nice physiques, right? When you go into a CrossFit gym, a lot of the people in those gyms also have relatively good physiques. So I think if you're looking at it from that perspective, there's definitely some pretty positive outcomes in terms of the aesthetics as well as the performance side, because you do, as you say, it's predominantly big movements. It's including cardio with weight training. So I kind of think with that, and if you've got a good coach who's not ensuring that you're not going absolutely crazy and you know, doing things horrendously, then I think you can make some pretty good progress. But that probably comes back to where are you training rather than what are you training, if that makes sense.
Anyone can open a gym.
100%. And I mean, the idea there, right, from their model is that you get, you know, weeded out because you don't do a good job, right, and people leave.
Yeah, my wife goes to a really good CrossFit gym, but she's we've gone to some tournaments or competitions by people who have lesser gyms, and some of the exercises they create for people to do, like one of the things was a 2-person unbalanced deadlift. It was the most ridiculous. I was like, someone is going to get their spine cracked in half here. One person was on one side of the barbell, someone was on the other side of the barbell.
Was it for reps as well?
Yeah, it was. Like, you know, there's CrossFit, so as hard as they can, and like one side is 100 pounds heavier than the other side. And my wife's coach was like, "What the hell is going on here?" Like something, but I don't know. I guess you can do it whatever you want.
I guess that's the beauty of it, right? You can do it that way, and people will look at it and be like, "Oh, that's bizarre," or they'll think, "Oh, that's fun," and they'll jump in and do it. And I guess for me, that's probably one of the biggest benefits I think of any sort of group training, because we've got a lot of different sort of, you know, high intensity type training facilities, and even ones that kind of do mixtures of different stuff as well, opening up in New Zealand at the moment. And I think the biggest benefit really is that community side to that, right? Is that people go in, they have community, they have fun, and so they stick with it. So what is it that's leading to the results? Is it the method, or is it the fact that the way that they're doing it is, you know, a way that draws people in, makes them consistent, and all of these other good things that can typically be quite hard when you're slaving away in the gym on your own? Like, I think those things kind of can't be underestimated for the way that they I guess draw people in, because as we know, the biggest, you know, one of the biggest things you can have is being consistent with your training. And if the way of training, whether that be CrossFit, whether that be powerlifting or whatever it is, if that thing keeps you coming back, that's how you're going to get the results, right? One method might be better than the other, you know, in theory, but in practice, the one that you do is the best one. So
beautiful. Yeah. Just, you can do something, you can just do push-ups and pull-ups from your garage, but if you don't quit at it, you can get ripped.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you see that with the calisthenics guys, right? I mean, some of those guys have some of the best physiques that you've probably seen, and they're not lifting weights, they're just lifting themselves as the weight, right? Which it works because they enjoy it, they want to progress, they find ways to be consistent. That's how you do it.
That's the thing, is finding the way to be consistent. Because even in my program, my group, is, you know, it's virtual, guys are all around the world, but they are making a lot of progress because there's that community aspect. You know, it's they can tap into people. There's people holding them accountable, people cheering on their progress. If it's just you by yourself in a dark gym, you have no one even knows you're doing it. You know, it can be, you have your off days, and there's no one to lift you up. So that's why my wife loves CrossFit, is because it's the team atmosphere. They could be playing bridge there. It wouldn't matter. She just loves the people who are there and motivating her and pushing her.
100%. And as I say, I reckon that is one of the biggest wins, and the things that CrossFit got the most right is how to create a really good, strong community that keeps people coming back for more, because that's the most important thing. And yes, the method works pretty well. I think we've seen that in time, especially when it's done well and programmed well. But yeah, that community piece, it can't be underestimated how important that is in all aspects of fitness, really. You see that with almost any crowd where people have a unique interest, right? Is they all keep coming back because they're doing the same thing. You know, it could be sailing, it could be rowing, could be whatever, you know. It's the community vibe that really keeps people coming back, as well as that challenge, I guess, to get better at what they're doing too.
So you're in New Zealand?
Yep.
What is the scene like in New Zealand in terms of, because is there a big CrossFit community in New Zealand?
Yeah, there is. I think, like, again, this is probably speaking from the outside now, because I haven't really been involved in CrossFit that much since 2018.
And I don't want to hamper on CrossFit, but
but no, I think it is still going pretty strong. Like, we've got a couple of gyms in town. It used to only be one. And then there's also, as I said, these other sort of, I guess, high intensity group based classes that are popping up a lot more. We've got this one, I don't know if you guys have it over there, called BFT. And then there's another one that's popped up in town called Studio X, F45.
We've
all these sorts of things, which are
private gyms.
I wouldn't say copycat, but I guess it is copycat, really. It's kind of gone with that model of, this is what people like doing. Let's try and find a way that we can do it a little bit differently than CrossFit, to have our own sort of spin on that take, but take a lot of those group and community pieces and build on that. So I think it's still relatively big here. So we do have, there's a lot of CrossFit people still around, mate. Just because I'm not in it doesn't mean it stops, right?
Yeah.
Was there before me, mate. It'll be there long after me, that's for sure.
So you've got kids, right? How old are your kids?
I have Toby, who's 5 months old, and then Harvey, who's just over 3.
Awesome. What role do they play in your desire to be strong and in shape?
Yeah, to be fair, man, before I had the kids, I was probably doing, well, let's be honest, probably zero conditioning if I wasn't doing it in a CrossFit style. When I'd stopped that and I was focusing on weightlifting, and I'd use that as an excuse to pretty much, I guess, be a bit lazy with the cardio. I'd stopped doing almost any conditioning work and was like, I'm just trying to get strong again, so I won't do a whole lot of cardio. You know, I'd walk the dog or whatever it is, but I wasn't doing any dedicated running, rowing, biking, anything like that. And so when the kids came along, it was actually my wife who kind of inspired me to get back into cardio, and it wasn't intentionally. She didn't mean to, but we were sitting there on the couch one day, and Harvey would have been probably, I don't know, maybe close to 6 months old, and Sash says, I'm going to go for a run. And, you know, so I stayed, looked after Harvey while Sash went and did her run, and I was thinking to myself, man, I should probably actually care about my heart health and my potential longevity a little bit more. And how do I know, as an exercise scientist, that you can really look out for your longevity? And it's conditioning, right? Like the strength piece, sure, I'm ticking that box, but I was doing nothing for my heart health. And you know, I know the benefits that come from that in terms of when you do conditioning activity, or you do, you know, get your heart rate up a little bit, how beneficial that can be for your longevity and your ability to stay around. And I thought to myself, man, if you really care about your kid and you want to be here, and you say you want to be here to see them grow old, well, you kind of need to make a little bit of a change here, and you need to take this conditioning stuff a bit more seriously. It needs to be a priority for you. And basically when Sash came back, I said, right, I'm going to go off on a run now too. And so I went out and did, I think it would have only been sort of a 2 or 3K run, maybe, 10 to 15 minutes. But since then, I've pretty much been consistent with my running or some sort of conditioning activity, multiple times a week, every week since then. And even now that my focus has shifted back to strength and I'm chasing this 300 kg deadlift goal, which I didn't hit when I was powerlifting, I'm still trying to keep in, well, I still am keeping in 3 runs every single week. They're a lot shorter than when my running had kind of become my focus last year. But since that basically day when I decided, hey, I want to be here for my kids. I want to be here to watch them get married. I want to be around for that. I'm going to have to make a change. I went for a run that day, and I just gradually built on that and continued doing that, because without that, I knew that I was putting myself at risk, and I wanted to put them first. And one way that I could put them first was by putting my health and fitness first and cool, I love being strong, but actually conditioning's one of the other pieces of the puzzle if you want to have longevity.
So let's talk about longevity in cardiovascular health and everything you just said. Like, like, why, from an exercise scientist perspective? Like you said, getting your heart rate up and doing cardio is good for longevity. Why?
Yeah, well, I mean, the way that I would think about it is, we know that, heart disease is one of the big things that can kill people, essentially, right, and lead to people dying earlier than they otherwise probably should. And we see a lot of correlations between things like cardiovascular fitness. People often talk about VO2 max, or that sort of short-term type performance. So a VO2 max, if we want to jump into what that is, essentially is your...
I hear that all the time.
So the V and the O essentially is volume, and the O2 means oxygen. So it's the volume of oxygen. And when we talk about the VO2 max, it's the maximum volume of oxygen that you can extract from the air and utilize in your muscles. So you can kind of think of it as how efficient is your aerobic system. And people will often think, hey, that that must also mean that it's the thing that means that I can perform the best as well. But actually, when we put two athletes side by side, they could have a similar VO2 max, but there's actually other factors like their efficiency, their lactate thresholds, so almost kind of what intensity can they maintain of that VO2 max, that actually are more important in terms of sports performance. But it's a good proxy for overall cardiovascular fitness or aerobic fitness. And we know essentially that if you have a higher VO2 max, you have a lower likelihood of, dying early, I guess, from these sort of conditions that might be impacted by that. And so obviously this is just showing that when you train your heart, right, it gets stronger, it gets fitter, it can, I guess, survive a bit better. One thing to probably caveat with that as well, and this is where not everyone, people will have the uncle or someone in the family who was a runner and they died early, right? You always hear people with that. But when we're looking at these studies about longevity, and it's always a percentage-based thing and a risk reduction thing. So that's the part that I would make sure that people are aware of. Just by doing exercise doesn't mean someone's guaranteed not to die younger. It just means that they have increased their likelihood that won't happen to them, right? But there's always a chance. Things happen, freak things happen, genetic conditions, all of these things that you kind of may not be able to foresee. But actually, if you want to put yourself in the best position to have the lowest likelihood of those things occurring, then we know that we want to have a good level of cardiovascular fitness to do that. And you'll see the recommendations, that'll be put around that sort of say, I think it's about 75 minutes of intense cardiovascular activity, or 150 minutes per week of low cardiovascular activity or lower effort cardiovascular activity. Those are kind of the figures that get thrown around. So I think of that from my perspective when I'm looking at my training at the moment is, while strength is my focus, I'm still making sure that I'm ticking off those minimums essentially. So there'll be other ways that I'll do that. It doesn't all have to be from running, right? If I'm walking at a brisk pace, that's a low intensity activity. When I'm out running, doing something, that's essentially considered high intensity, even when it's my, I guess, easy pace, because those paces are, it's quite weird how they classify those. It's based off these things called METs, which are like a metabolic equivalent. It doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense to me. But essentially, if you think of it as training, then I would say that it's the high intensity stuff, right? So, if you're thinking of your training for your aerobic system, which could be rowing, running, whatever, that's probably going to be high intensity. If you're thinking of it as a nice brisk walk with the dog, that's probably going to be, a low intensity activity. That it's still beneficial. And that's, I think, the part that we get a little bit confused with, is we think we have to go out and run to get all of these benefits. And sure, you'll get a few more benefits by doing a bit more of the high intensity stuff. But if you're new to this thing, man, going out for a walk is going to be really, really useful, right? Because it's a way that you can get your heart rate up because you're not used to that activity. And in time, you will need to add a little bit more intensity if you want to be doing that as your high intensity form of activity. But man, there's all sorts of people that will go out rucking, where they chuck a weight on their back and go through the forest. So walking can most definitely be a quality form of exercise. But yeah, essentially, if you're going back to your question, which feels like a little while ago now, essentially, we just know that a high level of cardiovascular fitness means that you're less likely, to drop dead of a heart attack or other sort of conditions. And even just general all-cause mortality, having a higher base level of cardiovascular fitness is really important. And that's probably the main take-home, is that it kind of reduces the risk of a whole bunch of different things. And that is pretty incredible, right? There's not many things that you can do in your life that are going to reduce your risk of all-cause mortality. But we know that investing a bit in your cardiovascular health, getting your fitness up, being generally active, that's one way that we can actually impact that. And so for me, it's like, just be a bit more active, choose things that make you have to move a bit more, that have to take more steps, because that's the other piece of this puzzle as well, is the research on step counts. Even as little as sort of 6,000 steps a day, which, we always hear 10,000 thrown around, but 6,000 is a pretty damn good number in terms of reducing all-cause mortality risk. And all that really signals to me is that being generally active is a good thing. Like choosing a few more of those options where you might take the stairs rather than the lift, you might park a little bit further away from work. Those little bits and pieces of activity, you might get up and move a bit more from your desk during the day. All of those little pieces of the puzzle are actually important. It doesn't have to be some big grandiose thing. Those things are going to be really important, right? Because they actually increase your overall fitness. But even just being generally active is really good for you. So maybe we need to find ways to do that, and just to be a little bit more active in your everyday life, which for some is going to be a big change. For others is going to be like, well, that won't do anything because I'm already doing it. And great, keep doing it. But let's not bag people that might actually need to start at a little bit of a lower level and build their way into something that looks a bit more like, you or I might call exercise or training.
Mm-hmm. How long does it take to build a stronger cardiovascular system that's, if you're a guy who right now it's in a really bad shape, does it take longer to develop that than, say, chest muscles, biceps, anything like that, or is it similar?
I'd say it's relatively similar. Like in all of those aspects, when you first start doing something, you're going to get those gains pretty quickly, right? It's probably similar with weight loss if you start a new diet or something like that, right? The initial changes come quite quickly, and you'll notice every week or even daily sometimes that you're seeing improvements or changes. So I imagine it'll be, that first few weeks or months would be quite rapid progress in terms of, if you're feeling like you're getting out of breath walking up steps, that will probably change within, I'd say, a few weeks to a few months, unless you're really heavy. Because obviously then you've got the weights become a bit more of a challenge, or inclines become a bit more of a challenge. But for most people, those first few weeks, you're going to notice some changes, and they're going to be changes that you can actually perceive. So whether that's, you couldn't run for a kilometer before, or you couldn't run for a mile before, and after 3 or 4 weeks of, doing some walk run, wow, you can run the mile, you can run that kilometer unbroken, you don't have to stop anymore. Those sorts of changes will come quite quickly. That will also, then build things like your VO2 max. But again, I wouldn't think of the VO2 max as the be all end all, because getting that tested is bloody hard. And actually a lot of studies that talk about VO2 max are just correlating performance with VO2 max. So if you think of a hard mile effort, that's probably a pretty good way to determine, is my VO2 max or is my fitness going up? Is test your 1 mile run time, test your 2K row time. If those things are getting faster in that time, then you're progressing towards better cardiovascular fitness. And that's a way that for me, and I think, for many males, we're a little bit competitive, right? So having some sort of a number that you can chase down might actually be the thing that you need to keep you motivated. Because for me, that was always the thing with running, was I had to have events that I was doing. I had to be training towards a 10K or a, half marathon or something like that in order to feel like I could stick with this thing, because I've always been a naturally competitive person. I like to chase something. So for me, knowing that, okay, I've entered a 10K event that's in 10 weeks, I'm not going to win that. Let's be honest, I'm not a runner, but I can at least know that I can run 55 minutes now. Well, let's try to get sub 50 by that 10 week time frame. And for me, that's what keeps me coming back and doing the work, right? So that's the other big piece of the puzzle here, is what is it that will keep you coming back and putting in the work? Is it a performance goal? Is it having a community of people around you that are going to help you work towards that goal? Is it knowing that you're doing this because you want to be here for your kids, when they're older? Whatever that thing is that can motivate you, find that, harness that, and use that in order to keep you coming back and progressing.
Have you changed your workout style? I know you added more cardio, but over the past, because you used to be compete for not strongman, but you competed professionally or something, right?
Yeah, I did some international powerlifting competitions up till 2014. Yep.
So from then till now, what's changed in your workout style and priorities?
Basically, when I first had the kids, it had to become quite minimalist, and especially in those first few weeks and months, where sleep is a little bit harder to find, life just gets a bit hectic. You're struggling to get much done, let alone being able to go and get in, hour to an hour and a half in the gym. So one of the things I tried to do was, essentially talking about some of that minimum effective dose stuff we did earlier. What is the sort of least amount I can do here? And for me, I was just trying to do sort of 1 or 2 sets. I was trying to hit at least one of those movement patterns that I mentioned earlier within the week. Ideally, I was trying to get 2 of each in during the week, but it was sessions that would take me literally, I don't know, 15 to 20 minutes that I could actually just get into the gym. I could work up to something. I could do a couple of sets. You know, it might be still have a few reps left in the tank, but it was still relatively hard, right? There still was a bit of intensity there. And then I would just jump, you know, to the next set and be done. So what the other part I would do there is how can I make sure that I'm efficient in my session? So rather than just doing a squat, it's what can I do that will interfere the least with the squat, but means I can get 2 exercises at once. So I might do a squat supersetted with a bench press, for instance, so that I can do my squat, I can do my bench press back to back, 2 or 3 sets, and that might take me 10 minutes or 12 minutes. And I've actually done my entire session for the day, right? Because there's 2 of
cardio in there
6
too.
movement patterns. Yeah, exactly. And then, you know, finding ways that I could do things like that was the key. Was what is my like an A-B type thing. So this is a push, this is a pull, or this is a hinge and this is a press, whatever it is. 2 exercises that don't use the same muscle groups, stack those back to back, you know, do one, do the other, then rest for a little bit, do one, do the other, then rest for a little bit, cutting down rest periods, and essentially just finding ways that I can hit my entire my entire body in a really, really short space of time, and also things that might be easy to do, like, or that you can do together. So if I'm doing a squat and a pull-up, for instance, those 2 pieces of equipment or not equipment essentially require no changing of weights. They require nothing similar. So I'm not having to go and lower the weight on a squat to be able to do an overhead press. I can just squat, walk over to the pull-up bar and do my pull-ups. So
a lot of times it's just finding ways. It's the same piece of equipment.
Yeah, finding ways to be as efficient as you possibly can in that session, but also doing things that are bang for buck, like we mentioned before with the compound movements. You know, I'm not going to spend 15 minutes doing bicep curls at the end of my session when that time could be spent getting in some deadlifts and some rows or something like that. That's probably the biggest change that I made. And then also finding ways to make my cardio be either things with the kids. So that could be things like, you know, walking or whatever it is, so that you're doing things when you're taking them with you. Or I'm really looking forward to when Harvey's a little bit older and he can ride a little bit faster on his bike, so I can go for a jog and also take him out of the house, you know. But at the moment, those are things where it might be I'm actually taking the dog out of the house for that period of time and going for a jog, so that I get the dog walking, but it's not a walk, it's a run, so that I get my fitness, the dog gets a little bit tired. Everyone kind of wins. Like, what are ways that I can, I guess, get multiple things done at the same time, so that my family life is included in that, or is, you know, I make it a bit better for my wife by doing something like that.
Well, you can start activities with your kids that are increase your bond. You know, you create memories with them, but also build both of you physically. Like me and my son both do, and daughter both, all 3 of us do jujitsu. Yeah, like, that's an amazing thing. It's crazy cardio. I'm just sweating. Oh my goodness, I never sweat and breathe as hard as I do in jujitsu. Yeah, do that. And yesterday, I was working out at the gym, and I just, for whatever reason, I had this bug in my head. It's like, you have to do cardio after your work. So I don't know why. It's like, I have to do cardio today. I was thinking I got to go on a treadmill. And then I realized, dude, you're going to go play basketball with Nathan in 2 hours. Like, just skip the 100%. Treadmill. You're going to be playing basketball. Like, that's your cardio. Just make sure you run. So when we played basketball, I was just running up and down, doing layups, and being a little more intense with my game. I was like, hey, this 100%. Is cardio. I don't have to be on a treadmill at a gym.
And I think that's one part where people get really, like, caught up in their activity, right? Is they think that they have to be doing certain things for it to be training, or exercise, whereas actually exercise is just physical activity, right? Like, so if you can find ways that are physically active, and as you say, if you can do those things with your kids, man, like that's a win-win. And you're also setting the example for your kid there that this is something that I do. I like to be active. I like to do these things. And so they kind of then jump on that and think, oh, this is something that's good to do. And this is something, you know, especially when they're younger, right? They like dad. They think dad's cool when they're younger. Yep. So if you can set some of those sort of things where they think this cool guy, the hero, is out there doing these things, I mean, that's one thing that I like to try and do as well, is can I role model? I haven't done as much exercise in my own home gym recently, but I've got this cool clip of Harvey watching me do pull-ups, and it's just one of my favorite videos, you know, because I'm just doing my pull-ups and he's sitting there. He hasn't yet learned how to count it. He's just throwing numbers out as to how many reps I'm up to. And for me, that's one of those things where I'm like, he was happily sitting there watching me and thought this was just amazing watching dad do this. And then he wanted to go and do his set, and so those little things as well, like if there's ways that it can even be push-ups, pull-ups, whatever that you're doing at home, if you can do those with the kids there, I mean, that's awesome, right? Harvey's watched me do heavy lifting sessions at home. He just has to listen to that and make sure that he stays, a little bit further back. And so there's a little bit to learn with that. But having them involved with those sorts of things is pretty cool, because they do get to see what you're doing. And I mean, hopefully that leads to them, perceiving that as something that is normal to do, which I think, is really key. If they think exercise is normal, they don't think it's a punishment, or they don't think it's, anything like that. They think that this is something that their hero does, their dad does, and I might do this too when I'm older. That would be cool. I might even jump in now with dad and do something. I mean, doesn't get much better than that, man.
Well, their normal is what dad does. So whatever you're doing, whatever you do every single day, it's not rocket science. It's what did you do today? That's what your kids are going to do. That's what your kids think is normal. Did you work out? Are you a guy who works out every day? Do you eat healthy every day? Then your kids are going to do that. If you don't, then your kids aren't going to do that. So just start.
And I mean, it's such an easy way to do it too. Like, you're not doing anything different to what you would otherwise be doing. And I think, particularly even if you're making a change in your life and you're doing this, I mean, that may even set an even better example, because they can see, oh, dad started doing this thing and he was able to stick to it. And, that's something that I think is also another cool way, is like, if you've made a change, or you've chased something hard and you've been able to do that thing, and you've, I guess, taken your kids along on that ride with you, I think that also is a really cool way to do it too. It's like, I stuck with this thing, it got challenging, and talking to the kids about that stuff, right? Because it does get challenging. Life isn't always easy, and doing anything worthwhile, it takes sacrifice and it takes effort, and it means that you have to actually put in the work when you, I guess, don't want to show up anymore. And those things, and having them along and seeing that and being invested in your journey and seeing the progress that you're making. And that's one of the reasons it's cool when I, have done these runs, and, my son's not watching me run across the line at the end winning, right? I'm coming way down the pack, but he sees me achieve this thing, and he knows that I've been going out and putting on my running shoes, regularly, and going out for these runs, and daddy's out on a run, and, then he sees me do the event. Like, I think there's something to that as well that is really cool, of setting the example of how do you go out and keep doing something and keep showing up and put in work and achieve something that you told them that you were going to do, and they see you achieve that. I think that's pretty cool and pretty special, and hopefully in the long run sets them up for that ability that when things get challenging, they have that ability to stick with it.
Yeah, they will use your memories as their blueprint, and if they remember dad stuck with it and achieved his goals, then they'll say, oh, that's possible for me.
Yeah, 100%, man.
What are some traps you see guys get into that keep them stuck in terms of their health and fitness? Because many guys are stuck for decades, never being able to lose weight for whatever reason. Like, where do you see what trips them up?
The big thing that springs to my mind is people's expectations. Like, if you have this massive, audacious goal that is the first goal that you're trying to achieve, and you have these huge expectations of a drastic change that you're going to make, as soon as that expectation doesn't meet the reality, then you start running into trouble, right? So you expect that you're going to get to here in a week, or here in 2 weeks, you're going to lose 5 kgs every week, or whatever it is, something that's just completely unrealistic. And then you don't achieve that. In your head, you now think you failed, right? And so what does that do? Then you just start falling back into the old habits and the things that you were doing previously. And so I think coming into something with unrealistic expectations is a surefire way for you to end up failing, because as soon as you don't meet the expectation, you've reinforced to yourself that you can't do it, if you know what I mean. And so from my perspective, going into something with goals that achievable and things that you can tick off and you can get wins as you go. So, a lot of people talk about process goals. So if you haven't been training regularly, probably coming in and aiming to train 6 days a week might not be the best approach, right? Unless your training is going to be something very minimal each day. If you think you're going to go in and do 6 1-hour workouts every week when you've been training 0 previously, I think you're dreaming. Maybe start with a couple of 30-minute workouts, over the course of the week, or even just getting more generally active and actually saying, I'm going to walk 4 times this week, whatever it might be, but going in with a process goal that's actually really realistic. Because if you're focusing on the doing rather than the outcome as well, I think that's another probably key piece, is people always focus on the outcome. I want to lose X kilos, I want to lift X weight. Whereas actually the most productive way to get to that outcome is to actually focus on what are the things that I need to be ticking off each week in order to achieve that? So if it's weight loss, maybe there's, a diet plan that you're going to follow, or there's things that you're not going to eat anymore, or whatever it is that's going to work for you to achieve that. It's ticking off those things each day. That could be training sessions. So if you want to improve your cardiovascular health, maybe you commit to getting outside every day and getting in 6,000 steps to start with, and you gradually build that up over time until that's 10,000. Included in that might be that you're going to run, 2 days a week to start with. That's cool, man. Like, if you're running 2 days a week and you're running 0 days a week previously, that's a lot more running, mate, than you were doing before. So let's start with something realistic, and then you can always add to it, right? And I think that the action is the key bit. It's really easy for us to get caught up in trying to optimize everything, or have the optimal program or the optimal diet or whatever it is, but we never start. You spend all this time planning, and trying to get it perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just start doing something. Go out for a walk with a dog, walk with your kid, go to the gym, just do some bench press. I don't really care, do something. And doing that one thing, action leads to action. So I think that's the other piece, is stop looking for the perfect program or the perfect diet or the perfect whatever. You know what is better food to eat. You know what is physical activity. So just start doing something. Doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be drastic, but you need to probably start doing something, right? Just start with a little bit of action and then build on that in time.
Yeah, perfectionism always ends up being procrastination. It's just, it's an excuse for wanting to be perfect, but really you're afraid to take the risk. What if I fail?
100%, right? It's like, and you think of that with things like investing, right? People are like, oh, what share should I invest in, or what thing should I put in? Just start investing in something, start investing in a basic index fund. It doesn't have to be the perfect one. Like, if you're not putting money away, you're not saving, no money's going to be in the account. You have to start putting something in, even if it's only a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that was excellent, man. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for coming on. Where do you want people to find you? What are you working on? Go ahead and let us know.
Cool. Yeah. So you can find me at HJP_StrongerDads on Instagram. That's probably the main place. I don't tend to spend a lot of time on Facebook or any other social media platform. I've just sort of decided Instagram is the simplest one for me. I come from a lifting background, so often, the lifting has been the thing that I've been wanting to watch when I'm on social media, is people lifting as a coach, as what I want to see. So Instagram is where you'll find me. You can have a look at our website as well, hjpmethod.co.nz, but probably the other big thing really is the podcast. So I run the Stronger Dads Collective podcast, and I'll be getting Chris on and getting him to come have a yarn, because I'd love to actually learn a bit more about who he is as well, rather than him just quizzing me. So yeah, the Stronger Dads Collective podcast, I've been, 66 episodes now. So it's been coming along nicely, and some pretty cool guests back there in the back catalogue. So feel free to go and have a look at that. It would be awesome.
Awesome, man. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.